Okay, welcome to a Monday afternoon stream. Today we're going to be talking about external instruments. I've actually been seeing quite a few questions about this around the various forums and things, just people asking questions. And so I thought, I could do a little demonstration today. We could talk a little bit about the overall thought process with them. I've got my Model D here connected right now, and so we'll be looking at that specifically, just the overall thought process behind it. This one, it's just a great instrument. It's a great replica of the Mini Moog. And we actually have two Mini Moogs on campus that we've had for a long time. One of them's in better shape than the other one, and even it needs a little help. But it's nice to have the sound and the functionality in like a new case, a new format. And so, Behringer's done a lot of really cool stuff, and so that's what we're going to be looking at. And if you're asking what campus, I see that in the chat. I teach at the University of Colorado, Denver. And so we've got a great, not like amazing, but we've got a pretty good vintage synthesizer collection. Got some ARPs. We got the Mini Moogs. We have some new Moogs. We have a new rack of theirs. And like things like DX7s and Nords and all kinds of fun stuff. So it's pretty cool. But this is a way to get some of that flavor into what we're doing in Logic. And so it's nice to be able to have a hardware thing that we're going to be doing. So this that's what we're going to be looking at. So specifically, and let me walk you through this whole process. I'll take off my plugin. When we do this, we're going to go to the instrument, and we're going to do the external instrument. If you don't have that in your recents, it's down under utility. And in this case, I'm going to make it mono. Now, that's because this instrument is just a mono output. So there's no reason to do a stereo output. We can do plugins and things that would make it stereo after the fact. But for the most part, we'll start with it as a mono track because that's all we're looking at. Now, in terms of the instrument inputs and outputs, this one actually has a USB port on it. But when I sat down, I realized I didn't have the cable right handy, and so I just plugged it in via 5-pin MIDI cable. So that's on my SSL interface. And then input is number 2. We're going into the instrument input on the solid state logic interface. So cool. Now we've got that. We do have an auto compensate latency, which we can talk a little bit about. It's not, let's see if this actually has no, it doesn't. So in the background, as we're doing some other stuff, I'll pull open the manual for that as well in a few minutes. So you can see what that looks like and what the auto compensate latency. I'm curious what the manual actually says for that. And so we'll look at it here in just a moment. But there's no controls over it, really. We have a level control there, as you can see. We have just the slider and the entry, the MIDI in, and or the MIDI out in the channel, and then the audio input selection. So not a lot of controls on this particular plugin, but it works really well. Okay, I've got the manual up. I actually wanted to just see what it says about that. It says, turn on to automatically compensate for small timing differences between MIDI and audio playback. That's all it says. Awesome, I guess. Thanks. Thanks for that deep information that you just provided with us, manual. Okay, cool. So if you're not seeing the different pieces here, keep in mind that an important setup option is the audio MIDI setup utility, which is part of OS 10. And we're going to open up the MIDI studio here. You'll see various devices that I've had connected at different times. This is my primary keyboard controller right this moment. And then here's the SSL12. And then a bunch of these are like just on top of each other. That looks like an old version of the same one. I don't know if I can just hit delete on that. I can. Okay, cool. It's like I feel like I could delete most of these things. They're just hanging around for the moment. But this is the SSL12. It has a MIDI port on it, and that's what I'm going to be using. So if you're looking for your interface or whichever options you have, you'll see the grayed out ones means that they've been connected at some point but are not currently connected. And then the ones that are currently connected are activated like this. And you can learn a little bit more about it, but not too much in here. It doesn't have any extra ports or anything. We can give it an icon if we wanted to. All that doesn't matter. This is really just for information to see if something you're expecting to be connected here is or isn't. But we'll quit that for now. Now that I have the MIDI destination set and the audio input set, I'm just going to turn on the A440 on the actual Model D here, because then that'll tell me if I'm getting audio signal. And I am. And we could calibrate using that. We could, get to a point where we know what level we want that to be. I actually have the gain turned down. Let's turn it back on. You don't want to go all the way up to 0 with analog gear. It's not the same system as a digital system. So I'm just setting that right now to about -20 on the meter on my audio interface, just to make sure I've got headroom and stuff. Then I play my main keyboard, and it's actually now triggering the analog synth. So my main MIDI keyboard is now triggering the playback of that. I'll keep it a little bit softer just for the sake of not being too loud. Elon says, I have 2 MIDI controllers and 2 synths with USB MIDI, but I have never had to open MIDI Studio. You don't have to. That's really just a way to troubleshoot. I do open it up every once in a while. Every once in a while on somebody else's computer, usually, because mine, I set it up. But the main thing would be the IAC driver is sometimes turned off. And so this is where you come in to turn on the IAC driver. And then sometimes when I've helped people set up their studio and they got a bunch of devices, it sometimes helps to actually make the connections in here. So that way, when you come to a place like in Logic, and I'll just do a new external MIDI track for a second, you'll see the ports here. Sure, they're all listed, but you can actually do some renaming and things in there, which makes it a little bit easier to stay organized. So there are some benefits of using that utility, but it's certainly not required. And Logic does a ton of this stuff on its own. Okay, so now I've got that. Let's do a sound out here that's really distinct, where we can get a nice clear beginning and end to things. The reason I'm saying that is because I want to do a timing test. Okay, let's set the release decay. And that's the filter, so let's also pull off so now I have noise on, noise off, right? And I want to, let's record that just for a second. So, like that, right? And now we're going to do a couple things, and this is some of the stuff I've seen. So say I want to use the same MIDI on a different synth. Now I have 12 inputs, so I can get all of my instruments in this room into the computer simultaneously, just with MIDI. I've got a MIDI interface. that does all that, or all USB. I could do a USB hub. So I'm not actually worried about this for me, but say you have like a 2-channel interface and you want to like use one instrument and then use the next instrument, right? So far the setup has just been, we're going to use it live. We're going to use this, the Model D live, and never ever need to like disconnect it or connect something else, or we'll just turn it on. We're always going to be working in our one home studio. And so, you know, that's fine. But let's actually come through now. We're going to set the same input as before and record. And then we'll do the D render just as a descriptor, I guess. And we're going to push record and record that in. So what I want to look at then for a second is something that's super interesting. You'll see that the audio comes in before the MIDI track, right? So that's impossible. That's an impossibility. How in the world is that happening? Well, let's try a couple things. This is something that I've heard a lot of people. This is the default settings of Logic, I would say. I haven't changed any settings to do this. I don't think it's just a complete straight ahead default setting of everything. Oops, I didn't want to do that. Cancel D. We'll do another channel here. So let's mute that one, and we're going to record into the second one. But this time, I want to try disabling the auto compensate for latency. Can I? Can I turn it off? It's not even letting me turn it off. That's weird. Do. That's weird. That might be a bug right now. Let me undo this plugin for a second and reload it. Somebody else has run into that, let me know, but that is super bizarre. So it's turned off right here. Weird. MIDI destination, SSL, input 2, and then it makes it turn on. So let's take off that for a second. So we're going to leave that input off. We don't even need the input coming in right now. So let's try recording again with that off. And then let's zoom in a little bit and see if it looks like it's the same exact, it's a different place, but still not lined up with the MIDI track. I love this thing. Let's look now. We're going to mute that one too for a second. Let's come into our settings, and this is where I would be exploring this with people. So you'll see we have, and actually this may be better if I weren't using the streaming setup. So I'm going to try that in just a moment with no streaming setup. So you wouldn't be able to hear what I'm doing, but I could hear what I'm doing. We'll try that in a minute. But I do want to look at, we're going to turn off the latency compensation. I just want to see if that by any stretch of the imagination helps. So we'll just do that from here. Okay, so we're going to look at that one now. And that one is the same as the last one. Okay, cool. So we'll go back into settings. Turn on that again. But I want to change my devices. So hopefully you don't lose me on the stream. So the reason you're seeing that huge latency is because I have this set up so the streaming portion can happen. Doing a live stream is super intensive. But if I just switch this, let me make sure my own voice. Oh, so you can still hear me, I'm assuming. So now I'm down to the normal 3.7 milliseconds output. And let's do one more test with this. So let's record and see if anything is different with this. And now we should be right on the money. We are. Okay, so in this one case, the driver I was using for my device is what was causing the shakeup. Let's come in here real quick and return on the output, which has that. I'm going to try one more time with those enabled just to see if that changes anything. Do it from there, I guess. Okay, last check. And let's see if that's back to the normal or if we have any change. Now you shouldn't have. So here's what we're learning. No matter what we're doing here, it's a little different every single time. In this case, even with the driver just set to the one that's on my computer, not for the streaming setup, if I'm using the external instrument to the output, well, to hear the sound, while I'm recording into an audio channel, it is auto-compensating that by actually a decent amount still on the track. And so that's what we want to turn off if we're doing this. We want to make sure that we're not setting this to an output and have the auto compensate turned off. That way we actually get the MIDI note at the same point as the audio file that you're recording into a new track. So that's the steps. Of course, if I wouldn't be doing this with the streaming thing turned on, but I'm going to turn it back on so if I do play something, you'll all be able to hear it. Apply. And that goes up to the much higher latency. Okay, cool. So interesting. You can't just take face value what Logic Pro is, trying to get you to do. Although I will tell you one thing. I'm pretty sure that when we're doing this live with the MIDI, so I'm up here on the top track. Let me go back up there. Input 2. All right, so let's turn that off and go back to the sound. Right, when I'm playing it like that, real time, it's going to just do it through the system as I'm playing it. I play a note, it tries to just go as fast as you can. The minute we play back the MIDI, let me mute the other noise track there. It's going to be auto-compensating that because it knows, or it's guessing that when you played this, that there was a certain amount of delay, and then it's trying to move it earlier to match up the delay that you played it with. So, for instance, and let me just, for the moment, hide all of these tracks. Okay. So let's do this with, for instance, an arpeggiator. So we're going to use one of the MIDI effects. Right, so we have that sound. Let's do this with like a drum track for a second, just to give us some sort of tempo bass. And we'll turn on our cycle region with the U key. I'm going to record arm. And just to make this sound like it blends a little bit, we're going to just dull down those drums a little bit. Okay. Oh, cancel. Okay, so we have that. Let's turn it down just a hair. I'm actually going to, I didn't need it so dull. I just wanted it out of the way a little bit. So what the compensate is doing, it knows that when I play a MIDI key here, and even if those are all perfectly timed, it's going to take a moment for the MIDI to go out of the interface into the synthesizer in this case, and then it's going to take a little time for that synthesizer to send the audio back in through the interface and into this track. It takes some time. So it's figuring out what it thinks that time is going to be, and then moves it that much earlier. It just doesn't work when you want to record that into an audio track. You need to turn all of that stuff off so that it can be as fast as possible. So that's the trick to the whole thing, is making sure you know if you want to record it into an audio file, at what point and what settings you need on or off for that. I think that makes it a little bit easier to understand, hopefully. If you have any questions, let me know. But I think what I'm going to do right now is record some stuff in using this instrument, see how I'm going to just do a few different things, a few different passes at doing this. So we're going to do another, let's see, undo, let's do just another one like that track. Okay, I like that sound. Let's do the arpeggiator, but have it go down. We'll leave it off for now. Let's do that. I just love having the synth out and knobs in front of me instead of having to use a mouse or a controller. Something about the tactile part I just really like. So let's do... let's delete that for a second and delete that. Okay, something super simple, right? So we're going to come into external, and I'm just going to turn off the output, the audio output. That was the problem that was causing some of those weird delays. So I'm going to do a new audio track, and this will be the D bass-ish part. And we'll set that to be input number 2. And then I'm going to record. Okay, I didn't have the output turned on where you could hear it, but let's double check the timing of it. And it's right on. I mean, it's right on time. So perfect timing. Now I can mute, or just, I guess I'm going to, in this case, I'm going to turn it off instead of doing something else. And we'll go back to the first one. And I'm going to retune so we don't have that harmony part. Okay, let's try. Okay, so now we've got a different part over here. Let's do a... add a little bit of that noise in there too, just for some clarity's sake. And cool. So external instrument. Let's turn off the output. I'm going to just put it in another track right here. And let's see how that one sounds. So it's working. The timing, I think, is what I played in there, but I am going to turn on the groove track because with the arpeggiator, the groove track that was up on the MIDI doesn't actually do anything. It just does the first parts of the notes still. With the groove track now, after I've done it, rendered into audio, it should actually line it up better with the actual drum offbeats. Except it messes it all up, so I don't even know if that's going to be better or not. You can hear how much mangling it does there. So let's change the groove source and make it the bass, and then do that part off of the bass. Okay, cool. So the trick then, if you're using external instruments here and you want to render them into audio files, is to make sure on the external instrument plugin that you turn that off, the input, before you record it into a track, because the auto compensate latency is going to affect what that sounds like. And it's going to move it earlier than when the MIDI even was to make up for all the delay that's in the system. And so you have to make sure you're not engaging that when you want to render it into audio files, or just move it. But I think it's easiest just to turn off the input so you don't have that. Okay, sweet. Some people came in. Gigadeath, thank you. As always, you're a king. And yes, I know sometimes I tend to either do it in a slot that's friendly for you all, or I end up being in a time slot that's like, 9, 10, 11 o'clock in Denver, which is not usually a good slot for anybody except for myself. Okay, Gigadeath says, do you use the record delay compensation right under the sample rate? Yeah, and I don't. And this is one of the reasons why I came through and figured this all out in the first place. So what Gigadeath is talking about is right here, this recording delay. The problem is that that's a slightly different delay than when sending MIDI out to an instrument and then bringing it back in, and then bringing the audio back in. And so I tend to leave this at the 0. Unless, there are some systems, but most of the time when I'm working with such minimal latency. But you could if you needed to. But I haven't found myself needing to. I think if I was doing more drum tracking or guitar tracking, then I would probably dial this down like we do at our campus studios. But I leave this at 0. And then you could see when I turned off the auto compensate latency here, that, we were getting, that's right on. It's like we're barely, it may be shifting it a couple samples, but it's minimal. When I had that on, it was moving it so far to the left. It was like seconds earlier almost. And so as long as you turn that off, you should be within the ballpark of sanity here. Let's see, gig it a little more. I like to do multiple takes of analog synth. It's like a guitar, sure. Send out an audio click and do a re-record. Then it's easy to figure out the delay. I agree. But in this case, so Gigadeath, what you're talking about is slightly different than what I'm interested in here, which is the external instruments, which MIDI is fully incorporated into as like an integral part. What you're talking about is checking your overall latency of like the audio recording part. And you can definitely test that out a few different ways. And I think I should show one more kind of interesting thing here that people don't always realize. With MIDI, I think I can do... I think I can do this without too much trouble here. But anybody who's using 5-pin MIDI cables, and I'm pulling it out right now. So that's this right here. I'm going to plug this up into the interface up here, because we're going to do a little sample. Come on, where's the... No, I'm not even in... Okay. So MIDI, this is the issue with MIDI. That's what we're going to talk about for a moment. Best way to do this. Okay, I'll do this with 2 different MIDI. We'll just do this with MIDI tracks for the moment. The first one, the out port is going to be that interface. And the second one, MIDI port, we're going to say off. I don't want to get any loop going here, even if it's just MIDI. Then the input port is going to be that SSL, and the out port will be off, right? So I'm going to come in with my pencil tool and just make... Oh, I already had it open. A couple of fun little things here. We're just going to do one. Right on the beats, right? So let's record. Oh, it's not recording. Wonder why. We'll just assign it. I wonder why that didn't record. Oh, come on. Darn you. Track. We'll do a software instrument track right after it. Import number 12. Please just do what I say. Weird. Oh, I see why. I have that stupid problem. Never mind. I knew what that was going on. Come on. So we're going to skip the external MIDI tracks. I hate them anyway. Oh, undo. We'll just do this with instrument tracks real quick. So this one is going in. And this one, let's set... Oh my gosh. No, we'll do it that way. Sorry, just getting this set up. I'm going to make a point here in about like 60 seconds. We're going to send this MIDI out the device, and then this one's going to record in the device. Just a few in a row, right? Okay, cool. I want to see how good this thing did. So we did a little loop recording here. Dang, that's actually really solid. Signs are not zooming. Are we zoomed all the way in? Okay. Okay, so with these 5-pin MIDIs, that's like the most solid interface I've ever seen with this. I'm not going to lie. I've done this with interfaces where you record, you just send out 5 notes and bring in 5 notes, and or 4 notes, and they're all like slightly off time, every single one of them. And in this case, oh, let me make sure we're not like quantized or anything. Let's try one more experiment here. So in this case, that was really good. This this interface I'm using has really terrific high quality components, clearly, but you don't find that in all of the devices. I've done this particular test a number of times and had very different results from different interfaces. Okay, so one more. Right, so let's, yeah, so here, it's harder to see, but you can definitely see it. So, because 5-pin MIDI cables and that technology is all serial instead of parallel, you can't actually send notes simultaneously and receive them simultaneously. They always come one after another. And you can see that right here. The first one is right on, second one's a little bit more late, and the last one's even later. Even if you play a perfect simultaneity on a keyboard, the MIDI technology that existed up until USB, and even I feel like sometimes with USB, at least we're more accurate. But it's impossible to have exact simultaneities. And so anytime you're working with those cables, you may think, oh, this stuff is still just as good. I mean, look at the differences from when I sent out an exact chord through, just like out one port right into the in port. It's that much different. Pretty interesting. But when Gigadeath was talking about audio, that's a whole different thing, and something that everybody should be doing at some point in their studio, where you send like audio out right into in, and you see just how much latency there is. You have to do a little figuring out, because when you're looking at the audio here, you can see the latency on my setup here with my streaming setup is horrendous. You can't record anything with that. But if I turn this, for instance, so that they're actually going out the same interface, you won't be able to hear my session anymore, but that's okay. 3.7 milliseconds output. And it even gives you this thing. It says this, it says this calculated value equals the acoustic latency when standing 8.6 feet round trip, or 49.8 inches output away from your speaker. But you could arrange, because I mean, we don't need to, if you're playing a click out of your Logic session, it's going to take, what they're saying is 3.7 milliseconds, and then the round trip. So you would adjust this until they're about, till you get the same amount. That way, when you're recording, say you record a vocal or a guitar or whatever, because you're monitoring off of Logic for the other tracks, either a click track or backing tracks, you're playing along with that. you're hearing the instrument either acoustically through the air if you have an amp, or you're doing headphones and then you're hearing from Logic, and then it's even later. Once you're done recording, if you played in time, it'll be late, and so you need to move it earlier, and this can actually automatically move it earlier. Okay, on to the comments for a second. Gigadeath, you were right. Send out MIDI to the synth and play around with the delay. I have great differences between instrument MIDI over USB compared to my audio interface. Serial MIDI is slower but more stable. I also agree with that. It's just quirkier, but there's some issues with USB as well. So I mean, none of this is perfect. It's good enough for most people playing with it. You know what I mean? Like 8 out of 10 musicians can play and they'll be fine. And then Gigadeath says 31200 baud, 8-bit, 3 messages per MIDI note each, 1.3 millisecond delay per note. And if anyone's ever, like, I mean, I remember back in the day thinking, wow, we can like daisy chain all these instruments. I don't need to have USB for every single one of my synths. I can just do the MIDI in and then the MIDI through, and then there's like little switches on the back. And so if it goes through this interface and then, or this instrument, and then into the next one, and then in the third one, we're talking about unusable latency by that point. I mean, you can get like maybe 3 of them daisy chained together and they still be musical, but it's going to be something where if you can just plug them all in to a source, that's better. And that's also why I have one of these. These interfaces, which I'm going to be putting with a lot of these things. This is great MIDI timing. It's not all serial MIDI is actually horrible. Some of it can be designed really well if they do the, you know, interpolation and smart design. And this is an example. The MIO stuff is so good. But it has all the ports that I would need, and you can plug this in and run each one directly to the source instead of daisy chaining and things like that, which is nice. And for anybody who's used a lot of stuff in the past, I just happen to have these sitting around, obviously. The MIDI Express, this thing is a beast. I don't think I don't think they're still making drivers for it, but parts of this I think still work. But the Mark of the Unicorn stuff was classic MIDI stuff. And so I think it's kind of fun to have one of these sitting around. I have one of their newer ones that is still being written for. But that one I don't think is. That one has SMPTE out, in and out, which was at a time something we really needed badly. Okay, let me see. And Yolan says, I have very low latency in my interface, but audio from external synth comes before the MIDI, even when auto compensate is turned off. It could be that you have something turned on here for recording delay. I mean, this is the only other time that it would come early. If that's turned off, but you have, if the auto compensate is turned off, but the recording delay you have it adjusted here, if neither of those two things are engaged, then I've never seen anything else move it earlier. Also double check, make sure your compensation, your plugin compensation, I mean, right now mine is set to all and it was working really nicely, but try that on and off too and see if that does anything. Otherwise, I'd have to see more like what your settings are, but I can't think of anything else off the top of my head that would cause that if those things are all set like you say they are. So, and always try this in an empty session, because if you have a bunch of other things and compensation is turned on, then it's always trying to do stuff. And I've heard people talk about compensation being broken for various things. It seems like that's something that they forget about when they're doing updates and changing features, that they sometimes forget that plugin compensation is a thing that's important. So, do it in an empty session with no other plugins and see what you're getting in terms of that. But I mean, I'm going to be honest. Logic is designed as a real-time engine. It doesn't like to do things that aren't real-time. It never has. Track freezing was horribly broken for many years before they finally fixed it. They don't like you to do this kind of bouncing down if you don't need to. And for that reason, I try not to if I don't have to. So I much rather have an interface that has all of the inputs I'd want on it. The only time, of course, if I want to use the same synthesizer on two different parts, that becomes something that you need to render it out for. And then, in that case, it's a consistent offset, which means it's off throughout the whole thing by the same amount. So then just manually move it. Don't forget to manually move it, but manually move it. That way, after you record it in, you see where the MIDI note is, you see where the audio starts, and just make sure they line up. Check at the beginning, check at the end. If they're off from beginning to end, that's a different issue you're having, probably like some sort of sample rate discrepancy with something. But otherwise, they should be off from beginning to end, and then just move it manually and do it once and forget about it. That's usually what ends up happening. Other questions before the stream goes away? This is what I was hoping to talk about, and there's been some great discussion. Gigadeath as always. And Yolan, you've been doing a lot of these streams lately, so... Well, on your new Mac, it works great. Okay. That's a good thing. Trying to think if there's anything else. We've just lost half of the viewers, so I think it's a great time to say goodbye. But I think an important topic to talk about. And I hope that for some of you this was interesting, and we spent a moment getting some MIDI cables connected and recording to the right tracks. I always forget the external MIDI tracks stink so bad in Logic. But there we have it. So I will talk to you all another time. Thanks for those of you who did super chats. You are amazing. You're why I get up in the morning. I'm just kidding. That's my children because they have to go to school. But if it weren't for that, it would be for you. So talk to you later. And we'll do another stream probably in a day or two.